Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Prashant Kumar, and I'm professor and chair in Equality and Health, and also the principal investigator on the Reclaim Network Plus. So welcome to the webinar series. So we are in webinar 29 today. So it means we have already delivered 28 webinars where we had 56 speakers from academic and non-academic sectors spoken about the green and blue infrastructure in different spaces. So this is the team of the Reclaim Network Plus. So I've got my colleagues coming from the UK CEH, so also from the Bangor University, University of Bath, University of Warwick, and the team is supported by our two fantastic colleagues, Mark Siemens and Charlotte Lee Den. The whole team has been very multidisciplinary. So we started this webinar in the very beginning of the Reclaim Network Plus. These will run until August, I believe, 2025. These webinars, we set it up in every Wednesday, happening between 12:30 and 13:30 for an hour, and having two speakers in each of these webinars, speaking for around 20 minutes. And the whole idea have been to bring in the speakers which come from the variety of sectors, including academia, businesses, charity organizations, and councils and the government. So you could see the slide here where we had two fantastic speakers last time around, which talked about the work around the the urban climate and the benefits of the nature-based solutions for flooding. All these webinars are recorded, so you could see these webinars on our YouTube channel. We will post the link in the in the chat. So the network, we started with a small team, and now it has grown significantly. So we got around 623 members, to be precise, coming from a variety of sectors that includes the public health, including planning and governance, and and they have like a wide interest, starting from hedges to the green walls to the green roofs and so on. And they represent almost around 45 countries. So it's a very wide network which has gone out of the UK. And as part of the Reclaim, we have done loads of activities, including funding the large projects, 9 large projects. This created the case studies, having the synthesis review. So one of them was already published on the urban heating. The another one is accepted on air pollution. And there are quite a few which are in the pipeline. We funded around 13 workshops. We got loads of secondment, which we supported. This monthly webinar is going on. We had 2 large events I mentioned, in the last 2 years. And the next one is coming up in January. There was a very interesting photography competition and the database we have been developing at the moment. And there is quite a lot going on in terms of engaging the wider community through the newsletter. So we got monthly newsletters. If you are a member, you might be receiving it. If you are not a member, you can just go onto the website and can just join it and can follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to know more about the activities of the network. So I think the highlight for this webinar is the secondment activities. So what we're doing is we're just highlighting some of these successes of the network. So we got 2 fantastic, the secondees. The one was the PhD student from the University of Reading, and she was working on the perception of the urban overheating. And you can go onto the Reclaim Network webpage to see the videos. They talk about their fantastic work they did. And one of the recent ones we had our director, Dr. Karina Carrado. She has been an awardee of the project looking into the gardens and how the gardens of the houses they have with air pollution. She did a fantastic job. And we had another one from Andrea Berardi, and he went on to going to the Borough Council and did some fantastic job. So there are some nice videos to see if you wanted to know what type of work they did and how they benefited from these collaborations. And we have got quite a few coming up. So there is one from the UKCH going to the Portsmouth City Council. So you'll hear more about that, in the upcoming months. So today, so we got 2 star speakers. So one is Professor Glenn McGregor, and He will be talking about the heat waves and the urban environment. And we got Sasha Gibb. She will be talking about the the public engagement and the public reading in the context of the green blue infrastructure. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to our first speaker, which is Professor Glenn McGregor. He graduated from the University of Auckland, where he did his BSc and MSc, and the University of Canterbury, where he did his PhD in New Zealand. He worked in Japan, Papua New Guinea, Hong Kong, New Zealand, and the UK. Presently, he holds the title of Professor of Climatology and Principal of Ustinov College at Durham University. His former academic services roles includes a president of the International Society of Biometeorology, chief editor of the International Journal of Climatology, WMO Lead Expert on Climate and Health, and lead author of the IPCC Special Report on Extreme Events and the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report. He's presently a member of the Management Committee of the WMO's Global Heat Health Information Network. Glenn's main research interests are the drivers of climate-related health outcomes. We are very grateful and we are very fortunate to have Glenn today talking about his work. But before I pass on to Glenn, just to say that these webinars are recorded, so you can see these videos later on in case if you are not being able to attend this or you want to look at it later. There will be a Q&A session. And I would request you to write your questions and answers in the chat box using the Q&A chat box there. And you can write your name and affiliation if you wanted to have those questions, your details being read with your question there. We will take those questions towards the end. And I've got my colleague, Professor Shelagh Malham. She will be chairing that session. So first we will have our two speakers and then we will go into the Q&A session. Okay, so yeah, over to you, Glenn.
Thank you. Can everybody see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, firstly, thank you for the invitation. I'm going to talk briefly about heat waves and the urban environments. Sorry, a bit of an advertisement for a book which will be coming out this month, which I've just recently written, Heat Waves, Causes, Consequences and Responses. There's an ongoing debate of whether we should have a universal definition of what constitutes a heat wave, but in very simple terms, heat waves can be described as periods of unusual heat lasting 3 or more days during the warm part of the year, the summer or the heat season. And I think it's probably safe to say when we see or experience a heat wave, we know we're in a heat wave because of the unusual levels of heat. They're often referred to as the silent killer because they're invisible and less spectacular. Some of their more noticeable counterparts, such as tropical cyclones, tornadoes and floods. And, that's obvious from some of the images we've seen on the news over the last couple of days with Hurricane Helen across the southeastern parts of the United States. Massive evidence of visible destruction, not so visible with heat waves. And of course, over the last 20 years or so, we've had a number of so-called mega heat waves that have smashed all sorts of climate records and exacted a very heavy toll on society and environment. And these are some examples of those mega heat waves. Many of you will remember the heat wave across Europe in 2003, estimated 70,000 deaths from that heat wave. And again, in Russia, 2010, something like 55,000 people died during that heat wave period. 2015, India and Pakistan, very intense heat wave, temperatures reaching up to 48 degrees, thousands of deaths, especially in India. Not so recently, Australia, 2019, end of January, during the Australian Open tennis tournament, actually, experienced widespread heat and wildfires. The city of Melbourne, where the Australian Open was being held, reached 45 degrees and something like 370 odd excess deaths during that particular heat wave. And recently, we all heard about the massive heat wave across the Pacific Northwest in June 2021. Temperatures reached over 48 degrees and at least 619 deaths recorded in British Columbia during the week of the heat wave. And I think we can point the finger of a clear human influence on climate that is responsible for many of these mega heat waves, or increase the likelihood of heat waves. Essentially, over the last 40 odd years or so, we've seen a change in the nature of the global distribution of temperature. This is a comparison to the period 1950 to 1980. So the horizontal axis here indicates temperatures above the 1951 to 80 average. And we can see as we progress from the 80s through to recently, then we've had a changing shape of the distribution of temperature anomalies, essentially a shift to the right and a bulking up of the temperature curve to the right as well, indicating increased frequency of high temperatures. And also an increasing number of so-called climate change attribution studies point to a clear influence of human-induced climate change on the likelihood of severe heat waves. And this is just a mapping of formal and so-called rapid attribution studies that have indicated a clear influence of climate change, human-induced climate change on heat waves. And in fact, an attribution study indicated that the 2021 Pacific Northwest heat wave was 150 times more likely because of the influence of human-induced climate change. So in short, heat waves represent a silent and deadly issue for cities. And I think we need to really give this attention, because by 2050, 68% of humanity is projected or expected to live in cities, and around 15 to 20% of the world's population will live in 43 to 50 megacities, defined as a population over 10 million by 2050. And this is a mapping of the present megacities, and the orange indicates megacities expected by 2050. Note the number of megacities expected to increase across Africa, some parts of Southern Asia, Middle East, and into East Asia as well. So these figures indicate a large number of people potentially exposed to heat waves. And we know from what we've observed from the recent mega heat waves are amplifying health risks, they're straining infrastructure and ecosystem services, and producing deep inequalities in urban areas. And this has become such an issue. On July the 25th this year, the UN Secretary General announced his call to action on extreme heat. So heat as an issue, not only environmental, political issue, has reached a high level globally with this recent call for an action on extreme heat. So turning to the science of heat waves and the urban environment. The urban surface and the overlying atmosphere are in a continual two-way conversation with each other. And that conversation we have to understand if we want to understand the relationship between heat waves and the urban surface. And that conversation takes the form of a two-way exchange of energy in the form of heat, mass in the form of moisture and gases, and momentum, essentially wind-related turbulence. And this two-way exchange and the nature of the surface, whether the surface be vegetated, bare land, or indeed a built surface, is critical in determining surface climate characteristics. So I think it's safe to say nowhere else on the planet are changes in the surface more obvious than in urban settlements. So essentially, urban surfaces have largely replaced natural surfaces, and therefore the associated alterations in the exchange of heat, moisture, and momentum have produced the spatial climate anomaly, which we often refer to as the urban heat island. And we're all familiar with the form of the urban heat island. It is essentially a nighttime phenomenon where we have an island of heat and an otherwise sea of cool air. So the urban heat island reaches its maximum expression at nighttime. So it's essentially a nocturnal phenomenon. Now, the big question is, do heat waves amplify urban heat and also amplify the urban heat island? Now, to answer that, we need to understand the so-called urban energy balance, which is essentially on the left-hand side here, we have the energy or heat available, which is used up by these processes on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, we have sensible heat. This is the heat used for raising the air temperature. Latent heat, this is the energy used for undertaking the process of evaporation. And evaporation is a cooling process. And also some of that energy goes into heat storage. So some of the net radiation and anthropogenic heat flux goes into heat storage, as well as into sensible heat flux and latent heat flux. And we usually talk about a volume of air in the urban environment in terms of understanding the magnitude and the direction of these different fluxes of energy. So just to emphasize, we need to understand what happens to these various energy fluxes during a heat wave. Now, I've referred to the importance of the nature of the surface in determining the direction and the nature of these exchanges of energy, mass, and momentum. This is a classification of so-called local climate zones, which is based on the nature of the urban surface. In the right-hand side here, this is from the Heatwaves book I was just talking about. I've attempted to summarize some of the trends in air temperature related to the amount of net radiation and anthropogenic heat, which goes into sensible heating of the atmosphere, or in other words, raising of the air temperature. Essentially, as you transition from an urban surface typified of sparse urban development and lots of vegetation to one which is a compact high-rise and low-rise with bare paved surfaces, you are increasing the amount of energy which goes into sensible heating of the atmosphere or raising the air temperature. In fact, you are progressing to a more desert-like environment. In contrast, as the amount of green cover increases, and we progress from a sort of a high-rise compact urban surface to low-rise sparse urban development, then we're becoming more forest-like in terms of the climate. On the vertical axis here, it shows an increase in the so-called Bowen ratio. This is just a way of expressing the ratio of the energy that goes into sensible heating compared to latent heat. So as the Bowen ratio increases, it indicates we have more desert-like conditions. So in brief, what I'm trying to say is that during heat waves, what happens in terms of the trend in these components of the energy balance is that we have less energy going into latent heat. That means because of drying of the surface, that makes more energy available for sensible heat. So sensible heat increases as a flux from the surface into the atmosphere. That happens to raise air temperature. And also during the day, a lot of energy from the sun, in simple terms, goes into storage in the urban fabric. Urban materials are very good at absorbing heat during the day. And at night, that heat comes out of storage. So there's an outflux of heat from storage. And that flux of heat out of storage in the urban materials helps raise the nocturnal air temperature, which drives up urban air temperatures at night, giving rise to the so-called urban heat island. And also there's the elephant in the room in the form of anthropogenic heat flux. That's all the heat emitted by human activities. And during heat waves, there is the question about whether there are strong feedbacks between due to air conditioning, as simply described in this feedback loop here on the right-hand side. So you have a regional heat wave, elevated urban temperatures, a decrease in indoor thermal comfort level, people reaching for the air conditioning switch, turning that on, and of course there is heat added from those air conditioning systems back into the atmosphere. And the question is, does that heat further raise urban temperatures? So you get locked into this positive feedback loop. We know that air conditioners generally lead to a rise in urban temperatures, but we know very little about the nature of the feedback mechanisms and processes and the extra heat added through this feedback process during heat waves due to air conditioning systems. So what is the evidence for heat waves perhaps amplifying the urban heat island? This is some work recently done on London. This is a real climatological approach. On the vertical axis here, we have a measure of the urban heat island intensity, which is essentially the temperature difference between a rural reference site and a London-based urban reference site. These curves here represent the average urban heat island intensity for all summer days, the orange, and not a random selection of non-heat wave days. So that's the urban heat island intensity and the diurnal march or pattern of the urban heat island, 1200 being midday. The red line, in contrast, represents the urban heat island intensity for a series of heat wave days. And we can see a clear difference in the urban heat island intensity for the heat wave days compared to the non-heat wave and summer days. So this temperature difference here of 1.5 or so degrees represents the possible mean amplification of the urban heat island intensity during heat waves. So that's some empirical evidence. Of course, there is also modelling based evidence related to the impact of heat waves on the urban heat island intensity. So I just want to finish off by talking very briefly about heat wave mitigation. Obviously, we want to take the edge off some of these extreme temperatures associated with heat waves, and that's all related to trying to manage the urban energy balance. And we can do that in two ways: by managing radiative exchange, by changing the nature of the properties of surfaces, by essentially increasing their reflective properties or albedo, or we can manage the sensible and latent heat flux, essentially by decreasing, through increasing the surface albedo, the absorption of heat by the urban surface and increasing evaporation through blue and green infrastructure. And there's lots of evidence on the effectiveness of these strategies. Here we have on the horizontal axis an increase in albedo, and we have different surface materials, different pavement materials, and we can see a decrease in the surface temperature as the albedo or reflectivity increases. And we can see the same for various roofing materials. This is air temperature. This is the base case of a flat black roof. And here we can see the associated diurnal pattern of temperature for a roof with a white coating. And also plenty of evidence from studies on blue and green infrastructure. And this is a figure from a paper recently led by Prashant looking at the effectiveness of different types of green infrastructure in terms of their climate benefit in terms of cooling. So I just want to close by saying it's clear that heat waves pose a serious threat to the urban environment, society, infrastructure, and ecosystem services. I think there's strong emerging evidence that heat waves amplify urban heat via a series of surface-atmosphere interactions. Much urban heat mitigation research, however, focuses on surface temperature as opposed to air temperature. So while at the microscale, mitigation strategies can obtain meaningful benefits in terms of human thermal comfort, for example, given by shading, at the city-wide scale, reductions in air temperature are small, generally less than 3 degrees. So a number of questions remain. For example, whether heat mitigation strategies are effective in reducing air temperature anomalies associated with heat waves, because these air temperature anomalies during heat waves can reach 5 to 10 degrees above long-term average conditions. There is also the question of the scalability of mitigation strategies required to achieve meaning reductions in heat at the urban scale during heat waves. That is the scale beyond the building or block scale. And also there's a contentious question about the social acceptability or affordability of citywide retro-engineering of urban surfaces to make those heat reductions required. So I think there's a prospect that without global action to curb climate change, even extensive mitigation actions and strategies may ultimately prove sufficient. And that's important because it emphasizes the fact there's no getting away from the fact that reducing carbon emissions is essential to guard against dangerous climate change and associated impacts of heat and other climate hazards on cities. So finally, thanks to Reclaim for the invitation to speak.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I think it's very, I think this topic is very important, and you explained it so nicely in terms of its impact and what could be done actually to get the mitigation. And I think the book looks very interesting, so I would be very interested to have a read of it and get hold of it when it's out, if not already out. Before, I think I'm going to now invite our second speaker, Sasha Gibb. Sasha works across arts, government, and business and third sectors to lead a public engagement, and that delivers what people want. Working with communities and artists to facilitate bespoke public engagement and data analysis that enables better decision-making and a sustainable, relevant public realm. Sasha has over 30 years of experience leading teams and events in commercial and not-for-profit art sector, including gallery director at CCA Galleries International and retail editor at Condé Nast, the World of Interiors. She's an MBA graduate, advises government on cultural strategy and policy, is a founding partner at Jersey Building Preservation Trust, and led pilot project Public Voice, Common Ground. So I think you will be hearing from her on this very interesting work. So Sasha, without any further delays, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Prashant, for that lovely introduction, and thank you all for giving up your lunch times to come and listen to us both. Glenn, I loved your talk. I mean, so informative. I am not an academic. I'm going to be, let's share my screen. I'm interested in the mechanisms for delivering the best public realm for people. So I'm going to get my as we know, there is no shortage of extremely good research, of strategies, ideas as to what should happen. What I'm interested in is the delivery. As Prashant says, I work across sectors. I work with government, I work with business, I work with third sector. And what I'm really interested in is delivering this change that we all need to make better cities for people. So in 2021, I started working with the government of Jersey. I was asked to launch their art strategy. I was then sponsored to do some consultancy on improving Jersey's public realm through sustainable partnership. This was in part submission of an MBA at Surrey Business School. The research was presented to the Future Places Ministerial Group in 2022 and given the green light and some seed funding for what became Public Voice Common Ground. So Public Voice Common Ground was a pilot that was presented to the British Irish Council Symposium on Placemaking in Cardiff last year. It's just been shortlisted for the Jersey Architectural Award for public engagement. I'm not quite sure what it is, but anyway, it's a great honour and I'm very grateful. What is clear is the importance of better public realm and placemaking is a global issue. Jersey, as a self-governing English protectorate, is quite a useful testbed for researching projects before scaling, and I was very aware of this when starting Public Voice Common Ground. So the purpose of the pilot was to deliver public realm based on what's actually needed to lead and illustrate relevant public engagement that enables this and to facilitate co-creation and value to all public realm stakeholders. So it enabled cooperation between government, business, third sector and community and delivered value through co-creation and shared resource. So this was a 2022 public realm ecosystem on which it was built. So in the initial research, I started very clearly looking at the value and understanding the value to the key sectors of the public realm. A co-delivery model not only delivers better results, it delivers superior value for money to, in this case, government, business, and community. So the pilot was both co-delivered and co-funded. Seed funding from the Economic Development Department of the government was more than double matched by business, third sector, community and volunteers. This was all because of a shared mission. All partners were signed up and had a stake in the very clear shared mission, which was consistent from the start. So to improve the public realm for people and to make St Helier, which is our capital city, a place to live, work and dawdle. It was delivered through 4 stages. The first to illustrate what's possible and to engage. The second to listen, and we'll be looking at methods of listening. Rigorous analysis, and the stage we're at now, which is commissioning as a result of this very specific community, public realm and city data. So the engagement priority was to engage as many demographics as possible, but in particular those not generally engaged with culture, politics, community. This required a complex set of series of public engagement events working with partners and local ambassadors. I used a mixed method approach, combining qualitative and quantitative data, and analysed this in the context of very specific environmental and community secondary data. Over 1,400 residents took part in a public survey that was available in 3 languages. There were over 500 face-to-face interviews and discussions. Interestingly, 23% of those taking part were under 25, previously a very unengaged demographic. So I used pop-up sites or temporary sites. These were co-designed, co-funded and co-delivered, and they were designed to both engage the public and show what's possible. I'm sure you're no strangers to the importance and the relevance of the 3 types of intervention: temporary, semi-permanent and long-term intervention. Importantly, all of our temporary sites have impacted permanent change in St Helier. So they're very good for helping actually implement long-term real change. So the first of the case studies was a pop-up park in Weybridge Place. This was with developers JDC, who own this site. We partnered with Sasha Gibb Limited, who are heritage consultants and landscapers, to create a design that slowed people down and actually gave them a reason to stay. This shot was taken through COVID, which is one of the, I love this shot because the cafes at the back were actually given licenses to use Weybridge Place. Previously, you don't get this kind of hanging around, staying use of the space. People tend to walk very fast from one end to the other. So what we wanted was a multi-use, multi-generation, accessible space that embraced the existing Petonk community. So you can see there are 2 different surfaces. The one where the cafe residents are sitting is Hoggin. This is where we play Petonk. Another name for Petonk is ball, but it's a big and important pastime in Jersey. So they used this site already, but it wasn't used by many others, and we wanted to get this used by other people. So we worked with Grow, a community-led small holding organisation tasked with reducing food poverty whilst supporting biodiversity and the community within St Helier. We worked with Acorn Industries. Again, they support those with disabilities and long-term health conditions to secure employment. We laid turf, we put in planters with edible produce, and the site was installed from the end of July until late September, and was open day and night. Prior to installation, JDC asked for a disclaimer against responsibility for vandalism to the site. Now, here's some of the volunteer feedback. In particular, I want you to have a look at the first one, that basically, despite being outside in a public space, there was no vandalism. Even the planters on wheels had not been moved. So the park was a success. Another reason for the success was Tony. So Tony is a local resident. He lives just around the back of the park. He's one of our Madeiran residents. His English is not strong, but Tony is a fine example of if you give people a stake in the spaces they need, they will not only look after them, but they will look after one another. So Tony became a completely honorary, self-appointed site guardian. He watered the grass, he watered the planters, he cleaned the blackboards, he bought toys for the children, he made funny little clay figures, and actually he would have really taken on anybody who messed with the park, but was fully invested. So yes, thank you, Tony. Use of the park, dwell time changed as a result. Total dwell time increased 5-fold in a 30-minute period, and 97% said they wanted the grass to stay. The second case study was a pop-up perch created out of 4 car parking spaces in a car park in central Helier, where we created 35 seats. A car park with no people became a safe and desirable place to be. There was a fair amount of skepticism on Facebook when we first installed this, but actually people came. They had meetings, they had read books, they had coffee, they had lunch, and it became 98% said they wanted the space to stay or would like to see more spaces like this in St Helier. The site was also used after dark. This was the third case study, Film at the Perch even, where we worked with the 13th Parish Film Festival and 11 local filmmakers to champion the work of local artists. We squeezed in an audience of 60, but there were also many more at the surrounding windows of the residents who moved sofas and armchairs to come and enjoy the films. What was interesting here, I think, was the maintenance plan. Certainly the projectionist was extremely worried about disruption being told off in a residential area. Would people want the noise? Sasha, we've got to have it silent. It's got to be a silent film. And I worked very hard in both reassuring him and coming up with a solution that enabled us to start not disrupting, but to make this kind of thing normal. So, you know, we showed local films. They weren't really noisy. We were finished by 9:30, although people stayed on, and we worked with the community. Again, with regard to maintenance, on the first evening, the site was installed. One of the ledges was snapped off. CCTV showed residents running around on top of this. We had prepared for this. Romerals, who were incredibly good partners, were prepared for a maintenance plan, and we decided to leave the ledge as it was, and there was no more disruption as the site became more and more. So free community workshops and events were used a lot throughout the project. These engaged a diverse audience using art as a common language. As Prashant illustrated earlier, my background is the arts. I'm used to working with artists. It's a very good medium for using both art as a common language, but putting everybody on an equal footing. Making and creating enables the mind to reflect differently to direct questioning. We think more slowly, more reflectively. When people are having a good time, they're more likely to stay. It allows more time to think. The art workshops have been extremely successful, and something that we may talk about later. I've been rolling out across other sectors like the National Trust for Jersey and government and the business sector. This was actually at the workshop at Children's Day, where we asked, what does wonderful look like? The data was then reproduced in another project, a full case study, which was revitalising empty shop windows in central St Helier, where I worked with partners like the Operas to get lighting into these frankly derelict, really grotty looking sites on the high street, and to bring these words to the public attention.
Sasha,
yeah.
Sorry, I think you might be touching the microphone or something on your end. It's sort of a bit grisly from time to time.
Oh, so sorry. How's that now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, so sorry everybody.
It's okay.
So we've got some words here from the workshops that have been reproduced in shop windows on the high street. They're also being printed in the Jersey Evening Post, which is our local paper daily. And again, they were discussed in the Festival of Words last week. I'm very keen to keep the discussion alive. These are our spaces, and this is what the people think. So the sixth case study was a 2-day clay workshop facilitated by London artist Joe Pearl. Joe worked with local potters and the Jersey community to build an imaginary clayscape of a city of St Helier where everyone wanted to live, work and spend time. Over 160 islanders took part in the earthworks workshops. We ended up with interviews, films, photography, and of course, extremely important qualitative data. It's a technique that we've developed, and we've actually used further clay workshops with Joe with the National Trust just a few weeks ago. The seventh case study, Le Galvoda. Le Galvoda is Gerrier for the Gallivanter or Wanderer. This was a public art commission for a walk by a Jersey artist, Tim LeBrie. And the walk really inspired all to look at existing St Helier through new eyes. All who took the walk were encouraged to share what they discovered to Instagram. So this might be a crack in the pavement or a particular view. We ended up with literally hundreds who took part and posted their work online. So we had poems, collages, paintings, prints, photography, and film. So the case studies engaged and they collected data. In Jersey, community data has not been collected in this way before. To put it in some context, the London consultants Arup were employed by the government of Jersey to produce a public realm and movement strategy in 2021. This was based on 18 survey responses and 25 stakeholder interviews. So this is in contrast to the over 2,100 engaged with Public Voice Common Ground. The public voice community data was analysed in the context of relevant secondary data, such as the 2023 VORG report, government strategies, and global research on public realm and placemaking. So we've had a look at the case studies and the first and two stages of the pilot delivery. We'll just look very quickly at the analysis and what people actually want. Well, Glenn, you may be relieved that across all workshops, the priority for all demographics was more accessible community green space, with 32%. Out of the survey responders, the 1,400 survey responders, 79% want more trees. 71% want more free places to hang out with no agenda, and 60% want more cultural entertainment. This survey question also prompted over 500 additional suggestions, and these priorities fell into the four codes of green and wild spaces for the community, traffic and access, reducing traffic, enabling more sustainable traffic transport, but creating better access for those who particularly need it, who may have restrictive accessibility needs. Social infrastructure, such as specifically designed urban seating, places to come together for free. Entertainment that revolves around community, revolves around culture, rather than perhaps just alcohol. Asked about funding, 85% believed it's a government's responsibility to deliver improvement to the public realm. However, this question provoked 230 additional comments, which fell into the five codes of government, parish, partnership, business and community. What is clear is for the best outcome, it cannot be delivered by one sector alone. So the impact of public voice common ground has been seen across sectors. In the public sector, it's impacted government policy. I'm working with the Economic Development Department and the Policy Department and Planning Department on updating the SPGs for a percentage for art policy. It's standard in Jersey when large developments take place that 1% goes towards a percentage for art project. So we're going to be improving the SPGs. So this is much more related to public realm and creating a better space for people, so based on the data. In the business sector, the site of the pop-up perch that we looked at, the percentage for art, the 1%, has been given specifically to public realm improvement based on the community data of the pop-up perch. So the data collected at the pop-up perch has led them to actually ask for my consultancy on enabling trees in the ground where they haven't been before, to install seating that has been made from fallen timber from the hurricanes that we experienced in Jersey this time last year. In the third sector, the engagement methods have been used by and are continuing to be used by the Jersey Community Relations Trust and Project Luso, working with the Portuguese communities, and also the National Trust for Jersey. I thought it might be nice to finish with a current and ongoing project as a result of Public Voice Common Ground. So a site on the northwest coast was bought by the government of Jersey and gifted to the National Trust on condition that it was developed for environmental, community and cultural benefit. Although over 3,000 responded to an online survey, there were demographics still missing from this data, in particular residents from St Helier, the youth and elderly. So in delivering stage 2, we again had clay workshops and specific discussions with these sectors. What became very clear was that in stage 1, the research defined the difference between locals and visitors to the island. In stage 2, it was clear it was much more nuanced than this, and actually the context was extremely important. We realized that actually we could have locals who lived incredibly close but chose to go to a different beach. We could have regulars who lived in London or maybe cycled from St Helier, which is an uphill, 45-minute cycle, but were much more regular than those who lived nearby. So it nicely illustrates the importance of context, of nuance, that detail is important and not all voices carry equal weight. So the importance of this kind of engagement if you're truly going to be getting the best outcome. So just to finish up, public realm impacts the economy, the environment, and society. The pilot acted as a guide through the process of relevant, inclusive public engagement as a basis for better decision-making regarding public space. The meanwhile or pop-up interventions supported this. They illustrated what was possible, as well as the importance of co-delivery. They've helped establish cross-sector partnerships that are being leveraged right now to win hearts and minds and overcome resistance to change in the long term. We've illustrated the role of effective communication and authentic community and stakeholder engagement in creating spaces that enable communities to thrive and cities to develop sustainably. And now I've just added both the website for Anthony Gibb Limited, where you can see some of the work that we've been working on. There's the Public Voice Common Ground website, where you've got both the analysis and a summary of the findings of the research. And then there's a QR code where you could contact me through LinkedIn or through either of the sites. But thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sasha, for the very interesting presentation. I think this is one of those areas which are, very important and usually not get a lot of attention. You want actually the public to get engaged in the process so that they can have the ownership.
Yeah.
And they could also, be the ambassadors for the change.
Yeah.
I really love the design of one of those, the parks you showed earlier. I could see that. I think it had got some of the stuff which I really like to see is designed in terms of the hedges around the road to also protect from the pollution. So, and I could see that there was quite strategically put it in. So I think you have been doing a fantastic job. So thank you very much for sharing your experience and keep up the work actually you've been doing, which is very important for the public and for the communities.
Pleasure.
I'm going to pass it on to my colleague now, Prof Shelagh Malham, to take care of the question and answer session.
Thanks very much, Prashant, and can I also add my thanks to both speakers. I think both excellent, both different but very complementary, and really sort of putting into contrast what we need to do, I think, overall. There is one question at the moment for Glenn, and I also have a couple of other questions as well. So the question is, for Glenn, do you have examples of cities where green infrastructures have been successfully implemented to counter urban heat waves?
Yeah, there's a number of greening projects happening globally. Manchester, I think, has been making an effort to green the city a little bit more than it was historically or recently. There are various examples across Europe as well. If the person who's asked the question sends me an email, I can point them to some examples.
That's a very good idea, and I'm hoping they will. I also had one. I mean, obviously, I'm more about blue because I'm from the marine biology section of the School of Ocean Sciences. Is there a lot in terms of utilisation of water to try and help mitigate some of the urban heat island?
I think water is sort of in some ways an undiscovered asset. I mean, there's many examples of water features across cities, urban settlements, ponds, lakes, rivers, so on and so forth. A lot of the research is indicating there are climate benefits, let's call them that, to having water bodies, especially during the day. There's a cooling effect. That cooling effect only has an effect over a short distance, though. But there's a big question waiting to be answered about the nighttime effects of water bodies, because water bodies store heat during the day and they release it at night. So while there's a potential cooling effect during the day, there's a potential warming effect at night. And water bodies in urban settlements tend to continue evaporation during the evening. So whether that jacks up or increases humidity levels, that's a possibility as well. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about the role of blue infrastructure in urban environments in terms of the climate benefits.
That very much reflects what my thinking was as well. I did have other question, but I also had one for Sasha as well. One of the things we did in one of our projects is started to use art to demystify science very much. But particularly one of the areas that we wanted to work in was related to schools. So I'm wondering whether actually a lot of the art that you've gathered and a lot of the co-creation and everything else, are you beginning to work with a lot of children in schools or through curriculums to try and help them understand some of the things that you're trying to do through co-creation, but also through understanding a lot of the science that's coming in, like you talk about trees, you look and Prashant pointed out how you've organized some of your installations to help reduce not only possibly climate mitigation but also with pollution mitigation. So sorry, I'm waffling a bit, but
it's Sheila, I really appreciate your question. It's an extremely important point. On a practical level, the schools are extremely important. If we're looking at sustainability, we need to understand the views of the next generation. And one of the questions I often ask is, of perhaps older generations, how do you see the public realm being used in future generations? And then, of course, the children, I'm asking them. I often talk about art by stealth. It's an easy way in. With the Children's Day workshop we looked at, there was one child who was 10 years old who came, and he initially said, "I think we need more shopping malls." When he started to draw and we quizzed him further and he was, more relaxed, he then said, "Well, what I really mean is, why are they taking away all the fun stuff and building all these flats?" Which was a very, very different answer. So I think there are two answers to your question. One is the engagement part. It's an extremely good way in. Also, on a practical level, surveys are not suitable for anyone under 17. So by working with teachers and working with schools and working with the youth service, I have access to this really crucial demographic. But secondly, it's an easy engagement with them. From the science point of view, I'm really keen to work more with organisations like the Wellcome Trust. I think art and science is one of the most brilliant collaborative partners. I'd love to do more. So if they're, whether for Reclaim or any of your partners, I'd love to be doing more of this engagement. It's an extremely exciting place to be. I think we think the same way.
Yes, I think we probably do. I also find children so creative as well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And to the point, and they get, you know, why are you taking away all the fun stuff and putting up the flats? You know, it would take us years to edit our thoughts down to that. So I'm with you. Extremely important from both a data collection, a change, and an engagement point of view. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Prashant now, because we're out of time, I think. Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think we should give a big round of applause to both our fantastic speakers today who covered the variety of the topic, but they are most important topics in the area. So thank you very much, both. So before I close, I would like to introduce our new webinar, the next one, which will be the webinar number 30. That's going to be on 6th of November, the same time, on the same day. And we've got two fantastic speakers, Carl McLean, and he comes from International Development. He's a manager for the Green Flag Award, the Keep Britain Tidy. And again, you will hear about the parks. And we got Dr. Jim Parker. So he comes from the Leeds Beckett University, and he's one of the awardees of the large projects which were funded by the Reclaim Network Plus. So you will hear some of the success stories of the case studies they developed around in Leeds. If you are not the member of the network, so you can join it for free. So there is a link there, which is the reclaim-network.org. You just go in there on the front page, you will see a link. You can join it and you can start getting the information on the webinars, but also a lot of stuff in terms of the opportunities for funding, opportunities for networking, and the upcoming event. So I would encourage you to share the link and join if you're not already a member there. We are also there on the the LinkedIn and the Reclaim network on the Twitter. So or we call it X now. So you can join us there as well. But if you wanted to be a speaker, or if you want to propose somebody to be a speaker on this webinar, so we still got a few slots left. So we have filled it until February 2025. We are now filling it until August 2025. So we would be very interested to hear from you. You can either write to the info@reclaim-network.org, or you can write to me or any member of the team with the potential names of the speakers, and we would be very happy to invite them as a speaker on the future webinars. So with that, I would like to thank all of you and our partners from the UKCH, Bath, Warwick, and Bangor, our team who has been organizing these webinars, and last but not the least, actually, the funders. It comes from the UKRI, the EPSRC, NERC, and AHRC. So it's been a very successful webinar series, and we will look forward to see you in the next webinar in November. Thank you very much.
Thank you.